good afternoon, good morning for wherever you are. Just wanted to say thanks for joining us today on the first of our series of our 2021 Thought Leadership webinar series here at Sycle. I am Miko Picard, Strategic Partnerships Manager, and I'm truly excited to be your referee, well, your host for today. Third-party referrals has taken our industry by storm in the last several years, much like it has shifted and changed our primary care physicians, optometry, and dentistry. As we move forward in a post-COVID reality, which we all can breathe a little sigh of relief at this point, right? What we face today, especially with third-party referrals on whether to accept, not to accept, or where to find that actual happy medium is where our discussion leads to today. With such a pressing issue in so many clinics, I've seen the impact of third-party referrals, especially in the last several years as a field rep, and this is why this subject is actually near and dear to my own heart. I've seen it and been in it with you guys as well. With that being said, I'd like to introduce to you our dynamic panel members who all come from various experiences and backgrounds, which I can't promise you all a pay-per-view Rumble, but I will do my best to try to find the juicy details and, of course, get a better understanding of the negatives and positives of their own experiences with third parties. Without further ado, I'd like to go ahead and introduce our panelists for today, Mary Bollinger, Alex Crippen, and Scott Wiedemeyer, who will actually take the time to introduce themselves as we go along. Mary, please go ahead.
Thanks for having me. I've actually been in the industry 20 years now. I started out as a part-time PCC and grew to an office manager, then got my license. I was a trainer with Sycle for a couple of years on the way there. And then for the past several years, I've worked with an independent hearing instrument company in the administration area as the company has grown and expanded, developed, worked with insurance billing, credentialing, and recently, about a year ago, we expanded a satellite office to full-time, and now I'm back in the provider seat again. So my why as to why I love the business is probably what you'll hear from the other folks. It's that mix of people, science, business. It's just a very dynamic business to be in. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary. Alex?
Yeah, hi, I'm Alex Crippen, Mason City, Iowa. I'm the Director of Operations for Hearing Associates. We're an audiology group with 9 clinics in southern Minnesota and northern Iowa. I've been in my role for about 6 years, and my why is just like these 2 other panelists, is to help people to treat hearing loss, and then to, on the business side, to improve efficiencies and profitability while we're doing it. And so I'm honored to be here today. I'm excited to see where the conversation goes.
Thank you, Alex. Much appreciated, and we're glad to have you as well. Scott?
Yes, I'm Scott Wiedemeyer. Like Mary, I've been in the hearing care industry for 20 years, a little bit more. I've tried to escape it at least one time, and it sucked me back in. So I've considered myself a lifer at this point. I've been the owner of a large practice in the past, sold it. I'm a partner in another good-sized practice, and then also have a billing and consulting company that works with practices throughout the country in the hearing care space, doing billing, credentialing, and other things. You know, my why is I enjoy the challenge. I mean, this is we're going to talk about it today, but you know, it's a scary and challenging time in the industry with third party over the counter, which is a whole separate topic. But you know, while those changes can be scary and intimidating, they're also, you know, I kind of relish the challenge and the ability to adapt the business and figure out a way forward and learning new ways to approach our industry. So I enjoy that process, and I'm looking forward to having that conversation about how we do that as a group of practice owners and people in the industry today.
Wonderful. Well, thank you, Scott. Much appreciated, and we're definitely glad to have you guys, and thank you for taking the time, and of course being the fact that you guys are on the spotlight with your fellow colleagues it'll always be interesting. But of course, we're all here for the same purpose in helping our patients here, and of course, keeping our business afloat, especially during these rough times. So thank you, panelists, for being here, and also to our audience members who logged on today. Definitely appreciate your time and also participation in our first of our series of our Thought Leadership Series here in 2021. During our panel, of course, please don't hesitate to ask questions in the Q&A box below. You'll see it at the very bottom. Feel free to ask any questions and we will get to you. Of course, I will do my best to try to keep you guys anonymous, but at the same token, of course, we're here to answer questions and help you guys with regards to your practices. We'll be also going through and what was that process, and actually we'll begin this question with Alex.
Yeah, so we were actually approached by a buying group that we were a part of at the time, and we were told that it was going to be a great way to supplement our traditional patient acquisition, that there were only upsides to being involved, and there were a lot of unknowns at the time. Exactly who would offer this benefit or these discount programs, how billing would work. We didn't know how the patient received information about next steps. There was a lot that we didn't know going in, but we decided to take the leap since that was the thing to do. And that is, the process was fairly clunky because it was new to us. It was also new to the group that approached us. But once we got signed on, I mean, anybody who's done it is familiar with the process there with the contracts and everything else. Yeah, so nothing exciting in the process of onboarding except lots of questions along the way.
And I think we find that especially that being the case with every managed care third party being so different and having different rules and guidelines behind each, that we do find that it can be convoluting and also confusing at times. But once accredited and get yourselves going, I think it makes it much easier for your practice to move forward. And I guess that same question going over to Mary.
Yeah, pretty organic for us. We have 9 providers in a variety of different geographic locations. And so each provider was faced somewhat with a little bit of a different atmosphere as far as what third parties were available, what they were offering. So our providers just jumped on at their own speed. For my husband and my offices, we jumped on pretty early in the business. Our philosophy is, the more times you have and opportunities just to have somebody in front of you to hear your story and build your referral network, the better. So we jumped in with both feet pretty early, and it's been a lot of, you adapt and you change and you weed out the bad ones, keep the good ones, and just kind of move as things go along. But so
Awesome. Well,
go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead, Scott.
I was just going to jump in. I think for myself, I would tell you my approach has changed 180 degrees over the course of my time in the industry. I know that 15, 20 years ago when Hearing Planet first came out, one of the first referral companies, and then there was others shortly thereafter. My philosophy was, why not sign up and see what happens. I would say as especially the managed care third parties have proliferated over the last 5 years. I personally and have worked with a lot of our collaborating practices to kind of flip that 180 degrees to kind of start with a default of I've got strategies for how I'm going to get my customers, and only if, so the default is no, unless there's a specific reason or business case for that individual third party in my practice that fills a gap, where they've got an exclusive contract or they fill some gap that I'm otherwise not wanting to, not willing to, or not very good at filling.
Great. Well, Thank you for that, Scott. So I guess let's go ahead and elaborate on that and some of the things that both you also with Mary and Alex said during that response. But when it came down to actually taking part in which referrals, is there some sort of assessment that you guys took a look at, or a means for you to follow in assessing all these, or was it kind of a shot in the dark with assessing and addressing each individual contract?
I'll go first. So at first it was more of a shot in the dark. And then as we started to get to know them and got to experience the process of working with them, the reimbursement, how many patients we were actually getting through those various memberships, we started to take a little bit more of a deep dive into more granular assessment as we've been approached, like Scott said, just taking a closer look before you ever say yes to something like third party managed care. Just what exactly are you agreeing to, and can you afford as a business to do it?
And for us, it's been pretty office specific. We have some offices in fairly rural areas. They have a tremendous traffic flow, still get response to direct marketing, newspaper advertisements. Really, the need is not there, like what Scott was saying. We have other offices that are in very heavily concentrated competition areas, urban environments. Those providers were seeing diminishing traffic, and so it was a way to supplement in those instances. So very much for us, an office by office and provider by provider process.
And I like to ask some detailed questions of the third parties, really making sure I understand what is the volume of referrals for this market area or prospective referrals for this particular office. What specific insurance companies are you contracted with that are driving referrals? Most of the practices I've been associated with and that I work with currently have direct contracts with a variety of payers. So really marrying up, all right, who's the third party contracted with? Who am I directly contracted with? And is there an overlap? Is there a competing factor? Or do they have an exclusive product within one or more of those payers that I can't get access to because of the exclusive relationship? UAW is a good example. One of our practices used to be able to see UAW patients. That became an exclusive contract with one of the third parties. So we had to make the decision, if we want to continue to see these patients, even on a reduced revenue and on a different revenue model, then we chose to be in the network for that particular third party in order to continue to service those patients.
Great, thank you, Scott. Which actually leads into our next question very well is, with that being said, what has been the negative impact of third-party referrals on revenue and profitability, if any, or has there been a positive impact, would you say? And I guess with that being said, let's go ahead and start with Mary.
So I kind of have three approach answers. My pragmatic answer is that I look at it that there's some fundamental truths in the industry that we can't change. Hearing aids are now more and more treated as a commodity and less about this full servant patient care kind of model that a lot of us for years have tried to provide for patients. I just was blasted when I finally woke up one morning and realized insurance companies are for profit. They're always trying to cap off what their payout is and consolidate billing. And, manufacturers, it's all about unit sales in the whole variety of options that they've got. My second answer would be kind of more philosophical. I'm with Scott. Ever since I can remember from 20 years ago, there's always been some fuel for fear in this industry, whether it's internet sales or retail presence of manufacturers in the market, big box, OTCs, PSAPs. There's always a fear factor. And I just one day decided, nope, I'm not going to buckle to it. It is challenging, but I'm not going to let it, dumb me down and give give fuel to that particular approach. And then the third thing is just on a very practical level, our average selling prices are down. We've seen minimal decrease in our cost of goods, which makes it very difficult to be competitive in some of our locations. As a provider, a lot busier, a lot less time to speak with each individual client. Sometimes in some of our offices, we have to sell 4 to 5 as many units to generate the same personal income. Takes more administrative support to do the workflow and the tracking for the TPA sales. And then, you've got that tension of, how do I keep my schedule tight and treat my clients personally and with the time they need, but then also keep that flow going so that I see enough traffic to keep my income level up. And, there's only so many hours and so much energy you've got in a day. And so that's always a tightrope.
Absolutely. As much as we all like to be Superman all day, every day for our patients, sometimes it makes it a little bit difficult at times. So can't agree with you more when it comes down to that. And I guess, Scott, your perspective. Thank you.
There's the obvious impact, a $400 or $500 fitting fee versus a $2,000 or $2,500 ASP is a different animal from both a revenue and profit perspective. So that's a hit that practices have to adjust to. I think we're going to talk in a little bit about some adaptive maneuvers for that. But that's the obvious hit, is figuring out, understanding that impact, understanding any way to recapture that. Personally, unbundling is something I'm seeing a lot of practices doing. Just changing your mindset on, 15 to 20 units might have been an average volume 5 years ago. Now with third-party fitting fees and including third parties, maybe that's 25 or 30 or even 35 units to kind of hit that same revenue target that you've had for yourself in the past. I think workflow is the other huge animal that practices and providers have to adapt to. Having a good workflow and way to tackle those third-party appointments when they come in, whether they're referred in or whether they come in from advertising and have some third-party benefit. And then, just really understanding, okay, what is my process going to be for these patients, and having a good plan of attack so providers not coming in and kind of getting deflated when they see their 4 evals for the day are all third party, and figuring out how to make that work.
Hey, great. Thank you. Alex?
Yeah, and just kind of continuing that thought that Scott just ended with, depending on how you reimburse your providers, or if you are a provider, how you're reimbursed, if you have a commission or bonus base, it does impact your pocketbook. And so just having a process in place, because it is different. You can't treat it the same. You need to learn how to track it, because each of those programs is different, and it's confusing, especially if you're a part of multiple. The cash flow, if you're bundled still, the cash flow is totally different, right? You're getting that dispensing fee or versus that ASP. And you need to know how to budget your business around those things, because you're getting money on the back end if you move them into a service plan, some of those maneuvers that we're going to talk about a little bit later. But yeah, and you need to find a way to make yourself more efficient, but not necessarily treat those patients differently in the room because they require the same amount of care. A lot of the other reasons the other two touched on, so I won't rehash them. But the main takeaway for us was that if we didn't approach this animal, is what it is, in a different way, that's when it's a threat. And that's when you, like Mary said, you can't lose sleep over it. You just need to understand what it is and treat it differently. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, thank you, Alex. And I think for me, ultimately, as being in the field for quite some time and seeing the challenges that we have, and I think one of the biggest things that always has been my recommendation is making sure that you guys know how much you're worth, how much time is spent with each patient, and then of course making sure that you clearly delineate that your third parties may not necessarily have the same amount of time as much as we would love to, but we know that we've taken a hit when it comes down to what we've had for a fitting fee versus what we're actually generating with a private pay patient. So these are things we definitely have to take a look at and calculate and have to take into consideration, as you guys have said. But I think first things first, especially as moving forward, is these are some steps that we definitely encourage all practices to take a look at, is where is my practice health and where do you stand? So thank you for that. Now, moving on to our next question, what ways have you found to counter that impact? What ways have you found to counter the impact of the negative effects, and what is possible and what actually has worked for your office? And we'll start with Scott with this question.
Excellent, thanks. I kind of alluded to it, and then I was also looking at some of the chat, so I thought I'd maybe address both. One thing is, I feel like practices need to look at unbundling and understand that fitting fee is really just that. It's a fitting fee. It's not a fee to provide services for all eternity or past that initial period. I know it's hard for some practices to adapt to this, what I'll call hybrid bundled and unbundled model, where you're charging full service, including a lot of services for a lengthy period of time for some patients, and treating other patients differently. I know that I've talked with Sycle personally about how we use the platform and tag patients so that we can continue to improve the tools that we have to help us manage that piece. But I think unbundling, and recouping some of those service fees as time goes after that initial period, having a good consistent process to really define what those follow-up visits are, what you're going to include. I don't believe I've read a third-party contract that says I've got to do all these premium services that many of you consider best practice, or provide Bluetooth support on an unlimited time basis, if that's not normally part of that process. So I encourage practices to really look and define what's included in those follow-ups, and then figure out what comes afterwards, and then certainly having those competitive products and workflow, so that if somebody comes in off of advertising and they're not yet enrolled in the portals, understanding how to approach that in the best interest of the practice.
Great, thank you, Scott. And with that being said, we have made some changes into the Sycle software, where I know Randy did ask the question as well of how do we tag, and sometimes it brings down ASP, and how are you recording these funds? Since you already addressed it here, I'd like to address it, Randy's question, where you can actually tag. We do have flags, 4 managed care flags that we've actually recently implemented into the system to better administrate which is truly a managed care third-party patient versus a private pay patient. And then at the same time, then also recommend that you would put those fitting fees as services and not true hearing aids, to make sure that you're selling just strictly the service for that patient. So that is our recommendation at the moment. I know that there are definitely some things that, especially with Scott, that we've chatted about on how to best make flow easier for you guys. So we're working on that, and I think you guys will see where we'll move and shift those changes as well. So that's definitely something in the works. Next, I'd like to move to Alex. Same question.
Yeah, I think that if you haven't already, unbundling is a good option to counter it. It also helps you understand what you really need in revenue per hour. And there's a lot of great tools out there to help you do that. There's groups out there that will help you. But that is a really smart way to have an upfront cost savings to patients if you're unbundled, so that it is more of a apples to apples comparison for patients who are coming to you, who find out after they've been to your office that they have this other benefit to keep them as a private pay patient. The other thing is tracking it. Learn to track it. Like Nico was talking about, the tools that have been built into Sycle recently of the being able to create flags with the custom groups has been big. The other thing has been the managed care with an expiration on it. Know what the plans cover. What, you know, I saw somebody put in the chat that the service contract requires, some of them require a year. That may be true, but there's also usually a limit on how many visits are allowed during that year. So you can be really granular, really specific with each of those. And if you unbundle, use those same tools. It doesn't just have to be managed care in that managed care program. You could put in, you know, 1 year service or whatever it is that you've sold them, and have an expiration on it, and it's up there in the top dashboard, as they call it, of the Sycle profile, so that you know what they get and when it's over. Before they had that, we were using preferred language, we were using email, we were using preferred name just to call those things out, because it was really hard to track, and I'm sure I wasn't alone there. But yeah, big thing, tracking, and then knowing how to transition those people after those patients have gone through what's allowed with the program. How are you going to continue servicing them and their hearing devices in a way that brings them in more in line with what your traditional patients have done, and in a way that is profitable to you as a practice?
You know, I would add real quick, just because I saw a lot of questions in the chat about this, dovetailing off that, the restrictive nature of those fees after the fitting is a huge deciding criteria, in my view, of
Right.
which ones you want to work with. You know, the ones that want you to give away a ton of services, and you can't limit your ability to carve premium services out and charge for those, as opposed to ones that are more understanding and flexible. That's a big deal. And if one is saying, hey, there's no flexibility, if you charge for a premium service when we deem that to be an included service, and that's not cool with us, well, then maybe you don't do business with them, because I think that you've got to have retain some options to recoup and generate some revenue outside of that core fitting fee.
Right. And I should have mentioned, and you got to be careful too, because there are restrictive things, not just with what services you can charge for outside of that, but also if somebody comes to you with that, you can't, with some of those programs, if your practice is a member, you can't transition them into private if they've come to you under the assumption they're going to move through that program. That is a violation of your contract as well. So you have to be really careful what you do with those patients.
Absolutely. And then finally, Mary, what have you found as an impact, and some of the things that you've done to circumvent some of the issues with regards to
on a real practical level, you know, as we've just tried surfing all this over the last few years, the owner of the company I work with really upped the game of our PCCs, gave them a lot more responsibility regarding insurance checking, realizing the importance of being able to manage and track that flow on a patient level, income level, the whole 9 yards, and gave an incentive opportunity financially for PCC. So really enhancing that teamwork process, because if you don't have an administrative talent that can organize and keep that bus running, it's going to die in the middle of the road fast. So hire sharp people and max them out.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Absolutely. I mean, that definitely makes it part of the flow. And I think when we all take a look at it, our staff is as part of this process to make things easier, not only for you guys, but also the flow and making sure that these patients are taken care of, or we may then also have them take care of some things that maybe put off for lesser known things that might be easier to triage by them, as opposed to for you doing every single portion of that fitting. So having that staff available also will help you alleviate some of the issues, especially when it comes down to scheduling. Now, moving on to the next question. With that being said, we've just talked about some of the negative impacts, of course, but what positive outcomes have you experienced with regards to managed care? And Mary, we'll start with you.
I have found, just as a provider, that often the leads coming in from third parties are sometimes a little easier to close. They have a built-in perception of value for my service that sometimes comes with a physician referral or an insurance referral. We've seen some instances where the repurchasing cycle is going faster than it would with some of our direct pay patients. Manufacturers are providing us with trial and demo units now very readily, whereas before we had to invest, a little bit more in inventory and stock. And less from a practical perspective on insurance filing and billing internally. So those would be a few of the positives.
Wonderful. Thank you, Mary. And then I'll place that question now to Alex.
Yeah, the biggest thing for us is that we've the leads from those TPAs have been maybe patients that we wouldn't have had come through our office otherwise, and so that has been a real positive. Just getting to see how those patients came to you, and seeing that was a gap that maybe we didn't have cornered in our marketing or our patient acquisition. Some of those things we've then since closed up and discontinued membership with those groups, but it was an educational experience in that. And some of them we continue to see patients who had, didn't know where we were, hadn't heard of us. So that has been a positive. The other thing that's been a real positive is that we understand ourselves better. We have better time management. As a practice, I think the providers would echo that. I think the other thing is we understand our reimbursement, not just with these third-party groups, but also our regular insurance and things like that, where we started looking at comparisons. Well, how do we get reimbursed over here versus this? And we started deep diving into everything we do a little bit more because it has become so convoluted. We want to understand exactly how we make money and what it takes to do it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And then finally, Scott, on the same question.
Yeah, I would dovetail off of Alex a couple of things. One, I would agree with Alex that I think this has expanded the marketplace. From what I can see in the market track survey data, penetration rates were always in the 20s, low 20s, 10 or 15 years ago. They're probably now approaching 30. From what I can tell, I do believe that managed care penetration and some of the third-party penetration into the Medicare Advantage marketplace is likely impacting that to expand the market. And it's hard, but the visibility and the awareness, I kind of joke, bundled pricing is lazy pricing. Having to figure out what you need to target in terms of an hourly rate, or looking at your economics and business through a lot of different lenses and slices of data is it's hard, but it's healthy to really kind of dive in and understand that. And last, I think, it's scary, it's intimidating, it's hard from a business owner in this industry standpoint. But really, when you think about, hey, the consumers we serve, the patients we serve, there's some pretty good plans that are coming out and benefits for patients. I mean, we don't love, from a provider or owner standpoint, those third-party plans where the patient comes in and gets a really nice set of hearing aids for nothing out of pocket, but that's a good deal for patients, right? And so I think if we think about a patient-centered approach and really think about, how what's in the best interest of patients and how do we adapt our business and our economics to serve patients and adapt to those improved benefits and plans that they now have available to them, then I think we'll win if we're able to successfully adapt to that.
Thank you, Scott. And ultimately, for me, my usual recommendation, especially back to you guys, is, and I have seen this. I mean, not as much as I would like to, but if you take a look at managed care third party referrals coming in as essentially free marketing, and granted, you're being sent this patient that you didn't actually pay any additional costs for marketing, but then leveraging these same patients and asking them for additional referrals. I think we all know that we're in a word of mouth business, and that's where it's heavily relied on, especially when it comes down to Google reviews or Yelp reviews and things of that nature. That for us to even ask for additional patients we can help from these third-party patients may potentially yield into a new possible private pay patient in the future. The more we ask, and we know how we are when it comes down to service, and of course we want them to come back. So ultimately, when we take a look at it this way as well, is, let's not try to leave any money on the table, and also take a look at these as additional opportunities for us to find additional patients. Thank you, guys. Now that we've kind of gone into a little bit of the positives and negatives, some of the outcomes that you guys experience, seeing that we have possibly, I know we have a multitude of different variances when it comes down to who's on our on the call at this point. But what would you say as a go forward plan, moving forward, putting a third party referral go forward plan together? What would you do first? And I'll start off with Alex on this question.
So when I say this, it's not what I did, but but it's what you should do if you haven't already.
Yeah.
If you haven't already, figure out your break-even point, your revenue per hour that you need. If you've unbundled and you're not using, as Scott said, lazy pricing, you've probably recently done this. But if you haven't, figure it out. You might realize that you're not charging enough for bundled pricing. So that would be where I'd start, because you're going to need to know those numbers as you start to move forward with who you can afford to do business with. I would say learn to say no. Some of the groups that we joined, we did it because a single patient came to us and said, I really want to work with you, and we wanted to do it for that patient. So we joined, and, we went down the rabbit hole as a result. And so I would caution you against doing that. Have a really good assessment plan in place for each of these groups, because they are each of them different, and they all have unique requirements and unique service guaranteed within them. The other thing, figuring out your revenue per hour, is designing some service plan packages for those patients after they've completed the requirements of the third party, that you can recoup some of what you've lost and have a model for them to jump into, rather than just paying office visits every time they come in after that is over, and knowing when that's over. So Tracking of these patients is incredibly important, and it was mentioned earlier about putting in the flags and the expiration through the managed care and cycle. Doing this after the fact, finding those patients is like a needle in a haystack, and it's very time consuming and completely avoidable. So do that, track them from the get-go. And yeah, that's what I would do first.
Great. Thanks, Alex. And then let's go ahead and move to Scott on the same question.
Oh, how to do it differently if you're starting from scratch, right? So I think just thinking kind of almost in terms of a business plan. If somebody's starting from scratch, I mean, third parties, I kind of put third parties, managed care, and marketing all in this related bucket together. And so a good example is if you've got a good digital strategy and a third party comes to you and wants to give you referrals based on their digital marketing, I would argue that that's in direct competition with your internal efforts. And you should think long and hard about whether you want to incentivize competition for yourself, driving up your own costs and lowering your revenue. So that's one example. I think if you're looking at how to get leads from a digital standpoint, thinking through, am I doing this on my own, or am I having a third party do it? To me, it doesn't make sense to do both. Managed care is similar, but a little bit more complicated in that you can have a contract with Anthem Blue Cross and also work with third parties that also work with Anthem Blue Cross. In many cases, both is a good answer, because you can still get direct benefits from some patients with that plan, particularly in the non-Medicare Advantage commercial products for those that aren't 65 yet, the patients. And then even in the Medicare Advantage, some of those are maybe dual eligible, where you can run it directly through your practice if it comes through your marketing, or you have to run it through that contract in the case of like a lot of Blue Cross Medicare plans, for example. Most of those I see are exclusive for those territories. So if you want to work with a Blue Cross Medicare Advantage patient in that area, you have to be a part of that third party. So really thinking through and analyzing and being purposeful in those choices that you make, as opposed to jumping in. And I would echo Alex's comment of not signing up just because you've got Joe sitting in front of you saying he's got that plan.
Great. Thank you. And Mary?
And I would just jump onto that and say, really know what's happening in your geographic area. Often it varies within a state, county by county, what the presence of that third party is. And, early on, we got a tremendous amount of leads because we were first in the ballpark with a lot of them. Now, as more and more competitors are signing up, the slice of the pie is getting a little bit smaller. So what kind of leverage do you have with that third party to say, hey, where am I in your pecking list? I'm not getting as many referrals. Are they willing to work with those of us that have been loyal or have a higher closing ratio or whatever it is? How do we keep that big slice of pie coming? And education and knowledge and, just staying on top of it, because it is ever changing, and every January it's a new landscape.
Absolutely, and that it is. We all know how many changes in the shift in chains. One minute it'll be true hearing, and next thing you know, it's hearing care solutions the next minute. So we all know how all that shift changes happens, especially during the year. So we can expect one thing, but then we can be thrown for a loop the next year. So absolutely, I can't agree with you more. I guess really moving forward with a few final questions, and then of course going into some of the questions. And I know we may not get to all the questions that some of our members have asked who have joined us, but what we'll try to do as well is we'll do our best effort to put all the questions together and come up with a Q&A sheet after the webinar as well. Because I know that we, just looking at time wise, we want to answer as many as we can, but we'll do our best to actually get a Q&A sheet out with some of the questions that were answered that were asked that we weren't able to get to. But question being one of the final few here, given that your fellow hearing healthcare professionals are on this call, especially those who are considering taking on third-party referrals, what did you wish you knew before you started? And we'll start with Scott.
What did I wish I knew before I started? It's an insidious little disease that gets into your organization and grows if unchecked, and will make you sick. So I would say be cautious and really be put a lot of thought into the why behind each one that you choose to do business with. Ask a lot of questions, do due diligence, and don't just say yes and I'll figure it out afterwards.
Thank you, Scott. And I'll same question to Mary.
Early on, we spent a lot of time just kind of shouting at the change and trying to second guess. Do we jump in? Do we not jump in? And lost a lot of traction. I would say, look at the options, maximize it, and avail yourself of networking within the Sycle family of practitioners, business owners. Everybody on this panel and hundreds of others would be open to a conversation. So pick brains, learn, study, educate, and don't just spend all your energy, shouting at things that are just change-based.
Thank you, Mary. And then finally, Alex.
Yeah, the only thing that I would add for this question is I wish we had a better communication plan in place to help patients understand the process and how it looks different than maybe what they were used to. That was definitely a miss for us when we first started, aside from everything that has been said. So make sure you're articulate in your communication so they know what to expect.
Absolutely, absolutely. And especially for me, with what I saw, especially out in the field, helping assist some of these third-party patients as they come in and out of the offices of some clinics that may not have been used to doing the instruments, of course, that I was representing. But a lot of them, of course, had this question and that question, and is this covered or this not covered? And of course, everybody's always under the confusion because they make things so confusing. But to put our patients much more at ease and give them as much information as we can in a much more clear and concise way, as opposed to what they receive in a pamphlet, of course, makes things a lot easier, not only for us, but also for them. Final question before we move on to the audience questions. What does third-party referral look like 5 years from now? And we'll start with you, Alex, on this one.
Yeah, I think in 5 years, there will probably be more groups and members given this, hearing aid program discount as a benefit, especially as we see more and more of those Medicare Advantage plans move into it. Being in multiple states, we've seen it a lot in Minnesota, and we're starting to see it grow in Iowa. So it's coming. It's more and more. I think that dispensing rates will and reimbursement will probably drop because they want to see what we're willing to take. And with that will be maybe like Nico, you were saying, this year it's True Hearing, and the next year it's whatever. I think that there will be different groups in the game. I know a lot of people on this call wish that we all rallied together, linked our arms, and said no. and maybe there'll be a time for that, but I think that it's here to stay. And I think it'll be interesting to see how the market changes as OTC comes into play and direct to consumer comes into play. I think there's a lot of changes in the future.
Great, thank you. That's definitely some great future insight, and I'm definitely in agreement to that. Mary, your thoughts on the next 5 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think that it's the 800-pound gorilla that we all have to wrestle with, in one fashion or another. I think it's just going to take a lot of patience and grace. I've got some patients that have bought 2 and 3 pairs of direct aids. Suddenly now they have a Medicare Advantage plan, and I have to switch them in my head to a whole different scenario for treatment, pricing, et cetera. And so, it just is going to take a lot of personal integrity and grace to maneuver through that. And I don't think it's going away.
Thank you, Mary. And finally, Scott.
Yeah, I would echo. I mean, we've seen third-party penetration grow significantly every year for the last 3 or 4 or 5 years. So I believe it will continue. I certainly hope it hits a plateau at some point, but I still think there's some headroom in terms of the market forces that are driving this. And so it's here to stay unless you're knocking on the door of retirement. You can chuck it and say, I'm done with this. I'm not going to figure it out. I think most of us in this industry have to figure out a successful way to adapt. And the sooner the better, because it's here to stay, and it's getting to be a progressively bigger issue.
I can't agree with you more. And like I said, one of my opening statements is it has impacted primary care physicians and also dentists and other allied health professions. So we've seen that as a trickle-down effect. So we can only anticipate what will that do as long as we continue to, I think, collaborate as we are here today on what our experiences has been as an industry, and not only between you guys, but also the rest of our colleagues out there. I think that's a way for us to really shape our future and how we can continue to move forward and still generate revenues despite some of the things that we are faced with. So with that being said, let's go ahead and take a few questions here. And as I did make mention, my apologies that we won't be able to get to all the questions, but we'll take a couple here. And what we'll do our best is to put together a Q&A sheet post the webinar. But first question here comes from, do you have much success in private pay referrals from these clients? And I guess let's go ahead and start off with Alex on this one.
Can you repeat the question, Nico?
Do you have much success in private pay referrals from these clients? I guess in what I made mention earlier, identifying that these have come in as a third-party referral, but then of course, are you able to find additional private pay referrals from them as well?
Sure. I haven't had a ton of success with that. The patients who come in usually have a friend, right? And that if they're talking about it with other people, and it is so different between plans, insurance plans, as to what benefit they have, that we may get them in the door, but when they don't have the same program or something, it is hard to close those people when they tell them what they paid for their hearing aids. I would say there's probably room for growth, though, in figuring out how to we've been trying to do the who can we help, who can you tell us about for a long time, and it's one more thing we need to tackle, and I think it can be done. I haven't personally seen a lot of success with it, though.
Okay, thank you, Alex. And Mary, off to you.
Same question. I can't say they've been a high percentage of direct pay referrals, but referrals for sure. Usually if it's family, it's within a very similar insurance scenario. But if it's, they're in a social situation talking about hearing aids, if you've done well for them, then people won't hesitate to refer you. So yeah, I think, like I said in the beginning, the more people you can get to hear your story, it's eventually going to pay dividends. Sometimes the seed just takes longer to grow.
Absolutely. And Scott?
I used to think that, hey, let's accept all third parties and we can get referrals off of those patients. there's a point of view that the more patients in your database, the better. To market to, I think it really depends on your game plan for getting those referrals and or marketing to those patients, and what you're going to do with those downstream to really build your practice, and if it makes sense.
Great. Have another interesting question here. When it comes down to third party and just the managed carriers. The question comes, are there any organization of providers that work collaboratively to negotiate with managed care companies? For example, if a managed care company changes their benefit from 3 visits to the first year to unlimited free visits for the first year with no additional provider fees, is there a group that speaks with that managed care company? Do you guys know?
I'm not aware of anyone.
Yeah, I'm not aware of anyone. I have on my to-do list for 2021 to reach out to some executives at some of the third-party companies just to understand a little bit more about their decision-making with the third parties and what they're including. I mean, I understand the economics that, the payers are looking to get as much as they can and provide as good of benefits as they can to their patients from a marketing and from a, enhancing their product. And so they're pushing, these third parties. So I think that's a good conversation to have. I'm not aware of any organization that's collaborating that discussion with third parties or insurance companies on a global basis at this time.
Agreed. Likewise, the same. And I know we're hitting at the top of the hour for our talk here, and we've definitely had some great conversations and topics, but just want to give everyone who is still on the call, we are recording, of course, the session, and we'll post, of course, the webinar as well. So we will try to get an answer to as many questions as we can. At the same token, create a Q&A doc of some of the questions that were asked on the Q&A side of things, and also answers and responses to them as well. And of course, some of the things that we're planning on doing this year from a Sycle perspective is an additional thought leadership, much like we did today with our panel. And our next one up will be on OTCs. But I'd like to kind of wrap things up. Do our panelists have anything that they want to say before I go ahead and close here?
Good luck.
I think, and ultimately, it's great, and I'm glad that you guys have been, and truly happy of you guys being here and being part of this panel. I'm definitely excited and have seen your guys' passion when it comes down to patient care and how you've approached each and every one of your offices on how different some of your approaches were, and how you kind of take a look at things in order to make things work. I can speak for myself when it comes down to each of the offices that I've gone into, that I've always been intrigued with how your inner workings worked, whether that's the good, the bad, or the ugly. And that's how I feel really truly has shaped where I'm at today. Of course, my knowledge base, and of course, being able to give additional information to really move forward. We're all in this together, and it's not just a message that really addresses things when it comes down to COVID, but also within hearing healthcare. And granted, you can consider each other competitors, especially in such a tight-knit industry, but we'll all get stronger as we band together. And I think the collaboration and hearing everyone's experiences, and today our panelists were able to share their own personal experiences and stories behind some of the challenges that they face, along with some of their successes. And I'm hoping, and they're hoping, that at the same token, you're able to take some of that information away and bring it back into your own offices. Honestly, me being in the industry for what is now 17 years, it's all about helping our patients hear, is really what it comes down to. I fell in love with the industry 17 years ago, like I said, seeing a patient fit for the first time and seeing their reactions overfilled with joy and tears. And I've never looked back. And I'm still here, right? So with that being said, to just sum up some of our discussions today, like it or not, third-party referrals are here to stay. Let's grow and continue to grow and use our collaboration to make us stronger and have more information in order for us to come together as a group, get a pulse on your office, and make sure you do an annual checkup as like we encourage our own patients to do, an annual hearing checkup every year. Where is your practice at? So go ahead and make sure you take a look at where your pulse is for your own office. Don't forget to reevaluate some of your practice goals. Should you unbundle? Are your patients happy with your current offerings? And are you still generating revenues? And finally, we know that every office is different demographics to different inner office with the dynamics of your own staff. So you've got to do what works best for you, but at the same time, make things simple and easy and don't overcomplicate things, because that's when I know things get much more difficult, especially for some of those that said that unbundling was so difficult to make. One final thought, of course, before closing, but Rome wasn't built overnight, right? So especially in the last 10 years, we've had not so great products. We had those units that actually knocked our socks off of our feet. We had changes in programming and software. We had the infamous Bluetooth connectivity. We had something that starts with a C and ends with an O, that who shall not be named. But we made it through, right? We all did. And this is just another thing that will definitely make it through, especially with third party. With that being said, I'd like to close with a quote and put this up here for 1 second and close us off. Oops. So final thoughts. You gain strength, courage, and confidence by every experience in which you stop to look fear in the face. You are able to say to yourself, I have lived through this horror. I can take the next thing that comes along. You must do the thing you think you cannot do, by Eleanor Roosevelt. And that's what I encourage you guys to do. As an industry, let's go ahead and band together, use our collaboration, use and leverage your colleagues. That granted, these might be things that we may not think that we will be able to overcome, but ultimately we will. We have, and in our past tenure, we already have, and will continue to do so. Again, thank you so much to our panelists. Thank you guys for your time. We definitely truly appreciate you spending the time with us today, and looking forward to our next talk. But until then, take care, stay safe, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.